Hi everybody, so today we're going to make noughts and crosses. So this is the basic development for your assessment. So as the rest of the videos are like, this video is going to go through the code and it's going to focus on building the code. We're not really going to go back and look at the in-depth stuff from the worksheet, so the worksheet should accompany this video and it should help you build at the same time. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is create a new project. So I'm going to go to create new project. I'm going to go to empty project and empty project and press next. I'm going to save this inside the folder that I work from, so you would have to change this and make it fit where you want it to fit. If you're in college doing this, then make sure you're not saving it on the C drive and you're not saving it on the repos because that's on the C drive. Make sure you're saving it in your area. However, if you're at home, then you can save it wherever you need to. Okay, so HE for me, introduction programming, and then projects. And then press select folder. Okay, and I'm going to call this Noughts and Crosses with an S. I'm just going to copy that. Okay, so now I've got this made. I'm going to press create. So now you'll see I've got a blank project open, and I've got Noughts and Crosses set up. And the first thing I need to do is create a source file that we're going to work from. So right click source, go to add, new item. We're going to use C++ file or .cp file, and then I'm just going to call this main, and then press add. Okay, so now you see the text editor appear. Okay, so again, when we go through this, I'm not going to put the comments that are in the worksheet onto it, just for ease of time really, because I don't want the video to be too long. With that being said, I'm going to hopefully go through the different code. If I make mistakes when I'm typing the code out, I'm not just going to edit them out, I'm going to correct them, because that means that I'm showing you how I would correct them as well. So I think it gives you that level of knowledge. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is add a range of include files. So again, you can see what these all do individually if you go into one of the worksheets. I think it's worksheet 2, rather than just go through each one individually now. Okay, so as you can see, a little red underline there means I've typed that out wrong. Okay, like so. So now we've got our include files set up. They're the ones we really need to start off with. Next, we need to add the using namespace std. And then make sure you're always putting them semicolons at the end of the statements or the lines. And then we will put a range of different prototypes now, or declarations. So for each one of the functions we use, as we've stated, we need to have somewhere for that to be initialized to start off with, or to create a prototype as it's called. Okay, so we're going to add a range of these. So we're going to add void display grid. We're going to have a void display input. We're going to have a void fill square. And then inside that we're going to have two arguments. We're going to have a row and we're going to have a column. Make sure you're putting them semicolons everywhere. We're going to have a void check input. We're going to have a void check status. And then we're going to have a void init, or initialize, as that means. Okay, like so. See, red underlined again. I noticed straight away, just spell that wrong. So inside here, you'll see now all of these have got a green underline. That's just because we've not created that function yet, so don't worry about that too much. One of the things that's really good when you're checking your code, if you go to a piece of code, for instance, and it's green underlined, it's a good thing to go to that function and make sure that function's set up right with the same name, because sometimes you might misspell the function name and then your program not work and you're not sure, and it's just a quick tell to see what the issue could be. Okay, so now we've created these prototypes, or these functions, we're going to create a set of globals. Okay, these are our variable storages. So like we have done in a couple of different worksheets individually, we're going to have a constant, which is rows of 3. We're going to have a const int with cols, which is 3. We're going to have a char grid, and then we're going to put some rows and some cols in it, like so. So char, if we've not covered that already, is character, so it's just individual character. We're going to have an int, we're going to have filled squares is equal to 0. We're going to have a char input, and then we're going to put space in between it, like so. And then one of the things we're going to do is we're going to look at how we're going to use these within the functions when we get to them. Okay, so we can see that's red underlined there, and that's because, I'll just get rid of this bit, you press equals, all variables have to equal something, and then the speech mark is above the @ symbol. So it should be like that, it should be a single speech mark like so. Okay. Okay, so, and then the next one we're going to have is an int current player. It's equal to 1. Cool. Okay, so basically what these variables are going to do is, the first one, constant row, is going to be the number of rows. We've got constant col, which is the number of columns. We've got the char grid, row and column, and that's going to define our grid. So 3 by 3 is our grid. We're going to have an int filled squares, which is a var that holds the number of squares currently being filled. We're going to have a variable which fills contains the current user input, so what they've typed in, and at the moment we've just initialized that with a space, but when it comes to the character, it's going to be whatever the character input is, whether that's like Q or S or A, etc. And then finally we've got the initialization of the current player, so whether it's player 1 or player 2's go. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do then is we're going to set up our logic for this Noughts and Crosses game. So we know we need to have our main, that's our main function that we're going to work from. Okay, and everything's going to work within this. So within this, the first thing we're going to seek to do is to initialize our game, like so. There's going to be a function for that, and all that's going to do basically is reset everything and then start from the beginning. And then we're going to have a do loop. So a do loop obviously is the one that allows it to happen once first, and then it checks the while upper, so while something is the case. So that would be, to start off with, system close, which just clears the console display, just in case there's anything there, currently from a previous version. Right, so we're going to have a little welcome message. Welcome to Noughts and Crosses. We're going to have an end line, and then we're going to start to look at the actual logic of the game then. So the first thing we need to happen is we're going to display the grid. So we're going to display the input. Again, make sure you put in capitals at the start of the words. We're going to check input. And we're going to check status. So, and then we're going to do this while to upper, which is just a line of code that makes whatever the input is be a capital. Input, which is a choice we're going to give later, is not equal to F, like so. So it's going to do this while the user doesn't press the button F, and when they press F it just means quit. Okay, so the display grids are going to display the grid, obviously. When display input's going to display the input choices, we're going to check the input from the user, and then we're going to check a win or draw condition, which is check status. Okay, so we've now got the start of our main. Okay, so that's all set already. Don't worry too much about these here. These are now going to link up to these variables, but then we're going to start to create these different functions as we go along. So the first function we're going to create is the display grid, and we're going to get that to appear on the screen. Okay, so we're going to have a void display grid like so. And then inside that, we're going to display the grid to screen. Now this is a bit tricky because we're going to be using an array and we're going to set it up that way, so we've got different grid references. We need to make sure that this is set up right. So we're going to have a cout, and then the first box, which is the top left hand box, is going to be a grid reference at 0, 0. Like so. Okay. And then inside these speech marks again, we're just going to have a line like so, because this is going to be how we separate the blocks and we start to build our little user interface. So that's the left hand key next to Z. Okay, so press that one now. And then we're going to have another box, so we're going to have a grid again. And inside this, we're going to have a 0, 1. And then we're going to have another line, like so. And then we're going to have our final box, which is grid 0, 2. Okay. And then we'll have an end L for end line. So that's the first row of our grid. So we've got box top left, then line, then middle top, line, then top right. Okay, so that's our first line. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly, now you need to be really careful if you're doing this, because if you don't change the things you need to, it's going to mess it up. Okay, so because I've changed it like that, I'm going to create our 3 different rows. The only thing I need to change is inside here, the first number is a 1, like so, because that's our next row down. And then on this one, it's a 2. Okay, so now you can see 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 0, 2, 1, 2, 2. Okay, so we're setting up our grid now. Now, obviously, that's just a big line. So we've got our grid spaces, but we've not got anything separating these, which is why I've left these 2 lines here. Okay, so for this one, it's not going to be a grid reference, it's just going to be different characters I want to see. So inside speech marks, I just want to put backslash, so hyphen, because that's going to separate our blocks from the top to the second to the third row. And then I want another line, like so. And then I want another hyphen, like so. Another line. Stop putting count on it. And then I want another hyphen, like so. Okay, and then when we've done that, I want to go end the line again. Okay, so you'll see that red just disappears. That's just going to work on this line currently. So you'll see now that would fall under there, that would match up to that, that would fall under there, that would match up to that, and that would fall under there as well. Okay, and now we can just copy that line of code onto that line, and then we've got our grid set up now. And then finally, we're just going to have a quick end line again, just to make sure it's nice and clear and there's nothing in the way of it all. Okay, so you should see now, when you can't run it yet because the functions aren't created correctly. However, when you run it, you're gonna see the grid appear in a certain way. Okay, so now we've set up our grid, we can move on to our display input. So void display input, and then inside that we're gonna have another code block. Okay, so you'll see it change colour. When it matches up, it'll change colour like so, and you'll see now them green lines have started to disappear. Okay, so within the display input then, what this function is going to do, it's going to allow the user to press an input and then update something because of that. Okay, so with that, it's not actually going to update it. What it's going to do is it's going to show this to screen, it's going to display it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a cout to screen, and then I'm going to put player as a string, space, whatever the current player is, You'll see when I'm typing it out, it's appearing here because it's telling us what we can choose. That's a good way. It's called IntelliSense, and it's a good way of going through it, and you can check your code because of it. And I'm just going to put a space before anything on this one, just because after it's going to say player and whatever that player is, and I put my space here. I'm going to put a space before just because it's after this, and then I'm going to put it's your go, and then we're going to have another end line. Okay, so this line is going to say player 2 or player 1, it's your go, and it's taking that from that variable. So again, semicolon at the end of it. Then we're going to print a screen again. Enter the key as shown below to call. With the grid. You can type out whatever you want here as long as it makes the same sense. The only reason I'm typing quite slow is because I'm making sure I do it exactly the same as the worksheet, and then if you want to change it very slightly as you go along, you can do, but try and stick to like the same names for variables and stuff until you're comfortable with doing it, and then you can maybe start to edit it afterwards. And then we're just going to have a print end L again. Okay, so you can put all this on one line obviously, and you can have end L's as you go through, but the way programming works is it's not all about having the code that is optimized. Sometimes it's better to be able to read the code as well, because then you can come back and edit it as you want. Okay, so now after it's done this, I'll need to show my options to screen. So I'm going to print the screen again, and I'm going to print inside a string my options depending on the grid, and I'm kind of going to draw the grid as we go along as well. So I'm going to put Q as my first option, which is the top left option, and then I'm going to draw that line exactly the same as I did before, and then I'm going to put W, and then I'm going to put finally an E, like so. Okay, make sure you put in everything in speech marks, not me sometimes, because if you don't, then it won't recognise that as a string. End L. Okay, so we've got our first row. So now it's saying top left is Q, top middle is W, top right is E. So there are options to press which way we want to go within the board. So, like we did before, we can copy this, just to save a bit of time. And we copy it like so. And then we can just edit the letters that we want to press. So, we want that to be A, and then we want this to be S. Oh, you can always press undo, remember. We want this to be S. We want this to be D, and then we've got Z, X, and C. Okay, so we've got these different options now, and then just like the middle, we can input that line there, which if we scroll up, we're making it exactly the same as this, remember. So we can just copy this line of code here, C out and make it a grid, copy that down to here, and then we can just add that as well. So we know we've set up our project the same. So you can stick a space in there just to make it easier to understand, but the way it's set up currently is what you need to be doing within that. Okay, so with that being said then, we know that we've got our display input. The next thing we need to consider is, as well as displaying that input, it needs to start doing things, okay? So it needs to start filling them squares out depending on what we're doing. This bit of the code is where it might start to get a bit more tricky, and what you might have to do is you might have to go over the worksheet as well as this video and work out where you're up to and what everything is doing. With that being said, make sure you comment in your code as you go through, okay? Because if you comment in your code, it shows that you've got that understanding from me as well, and it allows me to give you marks based upon that. So we're going to create a fill square function, which is our next one on the list if you look, and that's going to have two different values attached to it, and it's going to try and get that that value which is from the fill square. So when we type in something, it's going to take that value and it's going to do something with it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an if loop. So if the grid, and then the two rows and cols like so, is not equal to blank. So if it's filled basically, then print to screen Make sure when you do an if statement, you always put them brackets. Print to screen. As a string, this square is filled. Please try again. Okay? So that's one thing it's going to do. If it's filled, it's going to ask you for another option. Like so. And then it wants to run the check input function. And that means it'll allow you to type it in again. So if you run this, it says please try again. Then you can check the input and it'll take you back up to the check input, which we've not created yet. And then that will allow you to have another input and then continue you go and pick another square basically. Okay, so that's your if statement. So if the condition's met, do this, else do this. Okay, so if the condition's not met, so if there's a space on the grid and it allows us to put that RP star, we're going to add a little bit of a selection error. So it's going to put an X or a circle depending on that player. So we need to tell it firstly what player it is. We need to ask it to look for what player it is and then do something based upon that. So if the current player is equal, so double equal signs, is equal to 1, then on grid reference, whatever we've typed in the argument, I want it to put the character of X. Okay, so it's going to look if player's equal to player 1, and it's going to take the values of whatever's stored here, and then it's going to put an X in that block. Else, what I want it to do is if the grid, and again, it's going to take the row and column, make sure lowercase here is equal, then I want it to again use the same speech marks and I want it to put it the value of 0. Okay, like so. So X and 0. It's not 0, it's O. Okay, capital O. X and O. So, and again, put semicolon after it. So that's filled out that little section, and then because of that, we need to add 1 to our filled square var. Our filled square var is going to act as like a counter that tells us how many squares are currently filled, and then we can do like the draw mechanism and stuff from it. So we're just going to put filled square, like so, and then we're just going to put double plus after it, add 1 to it, and then semicolon. And that's going to allow us to add 1 to our filled squares function. And I'm just going to neaten the code up a little bit. It's always a good idea just to go over your code afterwards and make sure there's no like gaps that don't need to be there. Make sure it's nice and easily readable. Again, there's no point out the gap being there, is there? So I can do that, and all this means is that when you're going through the code, it's easy to understand. Like here, you can leave a gap because it's doing something different. Like there, I wouldn't leave a gap, etc. And then we can build it up. So, okay. So within the filled square, then that's it for that function. And now we're going to move on to the check input function. So this is where we're starting to look at what's been input, and then when it's been input, it's going to do something because of that. And this is where it starts to get a bit trickier. Okay, so the function we're going to create now is a static void. So it checks the user input character and attempts to fill that square. So, and again, you can look up some of these terms that you don't know currently as we go through. So static void check input as a function like that. Okay, so again, it'll change colour. Make sure you're using the same sort of code block like so. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take an input. So we're going to have a C in, so we'll take the input, and then we're going to save it in the variable called input. And if we're going to do that validation check like we did last time, if sin.fail, like so, print to screen, invalid character, try again. and then we'll have an end L again. And then after you've done that, I want it to check input. Well, I don't want it to check input, I want it to send you back to check input. Like so. Okay, and then inside the if statement, I'll just put a code block. It's a bit more of a complicated one. Like so. Okay, so you might have a bit of a structure to change around. Make sure that these brackets, see this line here on the left, it all links up. So when we start a function here, when we put that bracket in, it should have a line all the way down there to the end of that bracket. Sometimes when you look at your program, you'll see it's all broken up on the left hand side, and that's generally because them brackets aren't in the right place. So that's one thing you need to check. All this does really is it allows us to click on that button there as well and close that function. So when we get to the end of it, we could have our functions easily laid out like this, so we can click on it and go into our function separately. Okay, so we've got our little if statement there that's going to check that input and make sure it's valid for us. Then, when we know it's valid, all we want to do is we're going to change whatever the value is to a capital. And that just means that no matter if the person types in lowercase or higher case, it's always going to change it to the right version that what we need to do within our program. Obviously, as the user, it doesn't matter if you put the capital or lowercase to them, but to us it does matter, so we need to make sure of that. So, now we've got that value that's been stored here and we've been input by the user. One of the things we're going to do is, because of that input, we're going to do something. So we're going to create a switch case statement. So we're going to switch case, I'm going to take the value of input there. And then inside this is our code block. We're going to have a range of different cases, okay? So you can break these down into different lines, but for the purposes of this, all I'm going to do is I'm going to separate them line by line to make it easy to understand. So I'm going to have a case Q, and then this time we need a full colon, not a semicolon, a full colon. We need fill square, like so, and in brackets, not like so. Like so. And then inside brackets, we're going to put 0, 0. And then we're going to have a semicolon, and then break, and then another semicolon, okay? So this line here, really, it could be this. It could be in 3 separate lines and separated. But just to make it easier for this part, because we're going to put quite a few lines, I'll just put it in one line so you can understand it, okay? And this Q here is basically when we type in Q, so we type in this Q here, it's going to input into grid 0, 0, so our top left hand grid, which is why we've got that fill square of 0, 0, okay? So, with that being said, that's the top left hand corner. We'll copy and paste that, and you can type all these out, but sometimes it's just easier to copy and paste like so. The thing you need to do now, you need to be really careful to make sure you do it correctly. So you've got Q, and we're going to start from Q and go across. So we're going to have a Q, W, E, which is our top row. Then we're going to have A, S, D, and then we're going to have Z, X, C. Okay, so we've got our different inputs. Then we need them to fill different squares out. So we're going to have 0, 0, and 0, 1, and 0, 2. Then we're going to have 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2. And then we're going to have 2, 0, 2, 1, and 2, 2. Okay, so these are correspond to the different squares. If when you type in when you start to test it later and you start to press keys and they go to different squares, this is the reason it's not working. So go into this and make sure these are connected correctly and make sure it all matches up correctly. Okay, so that's one thing you need to do. When you've got the lines out slightly, one thing you could do is just straighten them up as well. Like, you don't need to do this, but it could help you when you start to look at your code. I'm just going to leave them as they are for now, but that's what you could do. Okay, so now we've got that set. After we've done this switch case, like so, we need to have a default. So this could be, it's about recursion, so it could cause an issue. and there's ways in which we can do this slightly differently, but because we've got that switch set up, we're going to have a default, and that's like the one we go to afterwards in case anything didn't work. So we've got our setup here, and we're just going to go to the end of that line and press enter, just so it's all in line how we want it, and we'll just press enter again to give us a bit of space, and then we'll turn capitals off. We'll have a default, and then we'll have a full colon, and then inside brackets again we'll put cout invalid character try again, like so, end line. And then if this is the case and there is an invalid character, we will go back to check input, and it'll allow us to do it again from that point. And then finally we'll have a break, like so, and we don't need to put anything in that, that's just to confirm with the default. So within this, we're going to take an input first, we're going to check to make sure the input's allowed, we're going to turn it to capital letters, we're going to switch the input, so when whatever the number is, or the letter is, sorry, we're going to pick the one we're going to do, and then we're going to add it to that value, okay, based upon what we've previously done with the x and the 0. So with that being said then, we've now done our check input function, and the next one we need to move to, which is probably the most complicated one out of all of them, is we need to move to our check status, and this is where the game logic itself is really going to operate. So I'm just going to neaten this up very slightly, and then we're going to go down to our check status. So we're going to have our static void, and then we're going to have check status, and then we're going to have a code block. Okay, so everything again is going to go within this code block. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the characters to check. Okay, so we're going to initialize the x, but change it to 0 if it's currently player 2. So we're going to initialize the x first. We're going to call it XO just to make it easy for us to understand. You can call this whatever you want really. We're going to initialize that x like so. However, if the current player is equal to 2, then I want XO to update to 0, like so. Okay, so it initializes as X. However, if it's player 2, I want you to then change it to 0. If it's player 1, just leave it as it is. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to set a flag or set a bool. Okay, so again, I'm press enter a couple of times. Then we're going to say, we're going to create a bool. So up here, see when I pressed enter there, and it's kept it on the same line as here, it should be moving back to the initial line, which is here. So I know there's something wrong instantly straight away. However, when I start to type it out, so I start to type bool, it comes up with red because there's something missing. When I go over, it's expected a semicolon. So it's not expecting a semicolon here, it's expecting a semicolon the last thing I've done, which is here. Okay, so I'll click semicolon there, that'll disappear. Get rid of that, press enter after that, and now you'll see it's back in line there of where it should be. So we're going to set a bool called inPlay, and we're going to give it the value of true. So this is saying the flag for if we are still in the play mode to set to false if there is a win or draw. So it's giving us like a state within the game that we can start to operate and play with. So the next thing we're going to do is, after we've set it to true so we know it's working, we're going to check the status. So we're going to check the game to see if there's a winning condition yet. There is ways of doing this apart from the way I'm going to show you how to do it. However, the way we're going to do it now is how it should be in the basic development, and then after that, then you can do it however you want. So we're going to do it dead simply. So we're going to create an if statement, and all of it is going to be a big condition. So if, and then the same condition brackets, inside here, because it's going to be quite big, I'm just going to give ourselves some room like this to do it with. And then for each one of the lines of the noughts and crosses grid, I'm going to create a different line of code or a different check for it to check. And then in between each one of them, we're going to have an OR operator. So if this condition, or this condition, or this condition, or this condition, whether that's top line, middle line, bottom line, cross lines, up lines, if any of them are matched, then it wants to carry on, it wants to do something. If they're not matched, then it does something else. Okay? So if the grid reference of 0, 0 is equal to XO, so no matter what this is here, whether it's equal, sorry, no matter what this is, whether it's X or 0, and the grid reference for 0, 1 is the same XO, so whether it's got an X or an O, and the grid reference for 0, 2 is equal in XO, then we've got our winning condition. So what this is going to do is it's going to look through the top row of 0, 0, 0, 1 and 0, 2. It's going to check whatever's inside that top row, and then based upon that, if all them three things are the same, then that condition's been met. Okay, so that's just the top row. And then if we put two straight lines, which is again is that one next to Z, if we put two straight lines down, this is saying OR. So this condition that's been written, or the next condition, or the next condition. So it only has to find one winning condition out of all of them. Okay, so to speed it up again, I'm just going to copy and paste this bit here. However, again, we need to be careful with this. So you can time it out if you want. So this is the first set of win conditions, and I want to check the row matches first. So we've got 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, and then we want 1, 0 because we're changing the first row. Sorry, so we're going down to the middle row now. Change the first values all to 1, and then on the second one, change all the values to 2. Like so. So 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 0, 2, 1, 2, 2. Okay, so that's checking all three different row matches. Now, I'm just going to have two spaces. And so I'm just going to copy that out again. Like so, copy all of it. And then here, do it again. So, this time, what we want it to do, we want to check the columns, okay? So, probably the easiest way of doing it is just going through these and getting rid of the values inside that grid reference, like so. Means we don't have to type out all the code again, but this will do. Right. Okay, so now we've got that set up. And then we need to think about it based on columns. So the first one is 0, 0, so top left. And then we want to go to the middle left, so that's 1, because we're starting from the left hand side. 1, 0. And then 2, 0. Like so. And then we'll do 0, 1. Sorry, 0, 1. 1, 1. 2, 1. Like so. 0, 2. And 2, 2. Okay, and then finally from that, we've got our cross diagonal ones we need to do, which their references are 0, 0, and you can draw this out if you want on a piece of paper, it'll make sense. 0, 0, 1, 1, and 2, 2. And then we've got 0, 2, 1, 1, and 2, 0. And then make sure when you get to the end of this row, you just get rid of that OR, because that's the end of our condition being met. Okay, so again we can close it off like so. Okay, so now we've checked the different win conditions, we need to give them a value if that's true. So if that condition's met, then do this, and if it's not met, then do this thing. So we're going to create a code block here, and then inside that code block we're going to carry out the following piece of command, or the following statements. So as we said, if within this function someone wins, we're going to run the win statement. So we're going to put C out to print a screen, and then we're going to put player, whichever the current player is. So current player, that's going to take that from the variable, and then inside text again, put space and put wins. So that player is now going to win if one of them condition is met, and then end L. And then we will change that flag that we set a minute ago to in play is equal to false. And this means that the game state is now finished. Okay, so again, I've got a little red underline here, go up to it. Says I need cons char, but if just looking over it, you can see I've just missed this bit out here. So I'll put more of them like that. Cool. Okay, so that is now closed, that winning condition. So if one of them conditions is met, then do this from there. The next thing we're going to look at is else if. So if that's not the case, I want to check to see if there's a draw or not. Okay, so I'm going to put else if like so, and then inside a condition again, I'm going to go fill squares is equal to rows times columns. So we know there's 3 rows and we know there's 3 columns. So if nine different squares are filled, then it's going to go over to here and it's going to check that against that. Okay, so it's underlined again. So can anyone spot it? So it's not actually filled square, is it? We're looking at when we go up here, it's filled squares. So that's another common mistake students will make, and the tutor just made it as well. That's like so. So filled squares is equal to rows columns. So when filled squares is equal to 9, then print to screen for me, it's a draw. And then we'll have an end line again like so. And then we will again turn in play, so our flag, and we will turn that to false, is equal to false. Okay, so with inside a statement, anything such as this, make sure you put the brackets in, like so, and you can see the structure starts to line up. You'll get used to how the structure works, and then you'll be able to kind of change it as you go along. You're never going to get it right all the time straight away, just keep going back and then doing it from that. Okay, so now we've set them 2 things to false, we know that's true. Okay, so if we're not in play, so if the game's basically over, what I want it to do is I want it to first display the grid, and I want it to display the grid just so it's got that on screen for the user. And then after it's done that, I want it to carry out the initialize function, which basically clears the grid and sets it back to player 1 again. And then I want it to give a message to the user. So the message to the user is play again, question mark, any key, or so I'm just going to keep it exactly the same as the worksheet, F to quit. Okay, you can word that however you want. You probably word it better than how I worded it there, but do you want to play again, press any key, otherwise press F to quit, and then end line. And then take the input from the user, and then they can press anything to continue, or they can press F to quit. And again, you'll see up here when we go to here, well, it's not equal to F, that's what it's checking against to run this loop. So when it is equal to F, we know it's quit, and then we won't continue from that. Okay, And then finally, after we've done the in play, so if it's not in play, then do this. So if we finish, do this. Else, I want it to do something else. Okay, so else, if the game is still in play, so it's still working and it's still operating the same, I want it to go if the current player is equal to 1, sorry, then current player should be now 2. Else current player remains at 1. Like so. Okay, so we've got if the current player is equal to 1, then swap it to 2. If it's not equal to 1 and it is 2 already, then don't worry about it and just put it back to 1. So it's going to swap that player around. Okay, and again, make sure you've got your else and your else there. Make sure you closed it off in that function correctly, and then make sure you've got this separated like so. Okay, so that's the big function, and that's going to check all of the different winning conditions, and it's going to check whether there's a draw and all that sort of stuff and break it down like so. So the final function we have to make is again another static void like so, and this is going to be our initialize function. So this is the one that basically resets everything for us. Okay, so we're going to firstly reset the current player, and we're going to set the current player as 1. Then we are going to do filled squares, and we're going to set that to 0. And then we're going to have a little nested loop that just runs through each of the different rows and columns and takes off all of the values that are stored within them, and then gives us a blank grid, if you will. Okay, so we're just going to have a quick for loop for this, and we're going to put for loop, then it's going to check the condition, so it's going to initialize int col, int row, sorry, we'll do rows first, and it's in line with what we were doing, is equal to 0 to start off with, and then I want it to run through the row and rows. So when row is less than rows, add 1 to row, and then again we'll have like a nested for loop inside this, and we'll put for initialize col again to 0. We'll have when col is less than cols, add 1 to that col value. So it's going to run through each one individually, and then whatever we do inside this now is what we want it to do. So we want it to set the grid and whatever the row value is and whatever the column value is. So up here we can change each one of these individually. Okay, so because these ones individually we're setting values in them, we're just saying whatever's inside this current row and this current column. So the current row and current column, we're going to set this to a blank space. So a blank space inside that character. Again, make sure you use the one that's above the @ symbol, because that means individual character. There is some other like little lines that look like it, but make sure you've got the right one. Okay, and that's so basically just going to reset our grid there, and then we can just neaten it up a little bit like so. And then there you've got the 176 lines of code that's going to make the basic development. So this is my testing bit. I've obviously written it all out, so hopefully it works. Let's play. Build succeeded. That's a good start, isn't it? Cool. So now it says, welcome to Noughts and Crosses. We've got our grid shown. So we're going to first display our grid, which is here. Then we're going to display our input, which is here. And then we're going to check the grid depending on what we do based on that status. So I'm going to press Q first, press enter, and then you see it's now filled out top left. And then its circles go. So I'm going to press E, W, sorry, and then I'm going to press E, and I'm going to press D. So now you'll see player 1 wins because they've got X, X, X. Okay, that's one of the winning conditions that we've checked. What you need to do is you need to go through this several times, and you need to make sure, again, a passive invalid character, that's good, so check that for me. So we've got an X there, we've got a 0 next, which is that. and then it should work. So if you go through this, it should help you complete the game, and then it should. So yeah, so we've got a completed game there. Carry out some tests to make sure it's got the draw function, it's all working correctly, you've got different win for circle and X. Make sure that when you're typing in the button it's going in the right locations and stuff. And then for yours, all you need to do for the basic development apart from this is you need to comment it. So you need to go through like I have today on the video, go through all of the code individually, tell me what each line of code does, how it works, all that sort of stuff. Okay? So hopefully this video was helpful. Make sure you're looking over the worksheet to go alongside it as well. And then I will speak to you all soon. Thanks.